I parked at the curb instead of pulling into my son's driveway. There was plenty of room. I just didn't want anyone having to move their car because of me. The October air smelled like charcoal and fallen leaves. Blue balloons were tied to the mailbox, and a crooked cardboard sign read, "Happy H birthday, Ethan." The tape on one corner had come loose, so every time the wind picked up, it slapped against the post. I smiled. That looked like something my grandson would have helped make. I reached into the bed of my old Ford F-150 and carefully lifted out the bicycle. I'd found it at a garage sale for $20. Rusty chain, bent fender, missing pedals. I'd spent 3 weekends rebuilding it in my garage. New tires, new brakes, fresh blue paint, because Ethan had told me a month earlier, "Grandpa, blue's my lucky color." The paint still smelled new. In my other hand was a foil pan of baked macaroni and cheese. Carol's recipe, my late wife's recipe, extra cheddar, crushed Ritz crackers on top, the same dish Jason used to ask for every birthday before he was old enough to shave. I climbed the porch steps and reached for the doorbell. The front door opened before I touched it. Jason stepped outside. Then, without saying hello, he pulled the door almost shut behind him. "Dad." "Hey, buddy." I smiled and held up the bicycle. "I think somebody's getting too big for training wheels." He didn't even look at it. Instead, he stretched both arms across the doorway, like a man trying to stop floodwater. "Dad?" His voice barely rose above a whisper. "Stay out." I laughed. Not because it was funny, because my brain refused to believe I'd heard him correctly. "What?" "My wife's family's here." I waited for the punchline. It never came. I leaned just enough to see past him. Emily's father stood in the dining room carving a roast. Her mother was pouring sweet tea into glasses. 2 of her brothers were watching football in the living room. Then I spotted Ethan. He looked toward the front door. His face lit up. "Grandpa!" He started running. Jason didn't even turn around. He simply said, "Ethan." The little boy froze. "Go help Grandma with the cake." Ethan looked from his father to me, then quietly walked away. That image still visits me sometimes, not the doorway. My grandson looking confused because the 2 men he loved were suddenly acting like strangers. I cleared my throat. I drove about 45 minutes. I know. I brought his present. "I'll take it." He reached for the bicycle. I didn't let go. "Not yet." "You want me to leave it out here?" "It'll be fine." "Does Ethan know I'm here?" Jason looked over his shoulder before answering. "No." "Why?" He rubbed the back of his neck. "Because then he'll ask why you aren't coming inside." Neither of us spoke. I could hear people laughing inside the house. Somebody turned the football game up louder. Plates clinked together. Life kept moving. Just not for me. Finally, I asked the question that had been sitting in my throat since he opened the door. "Am I embarrassing you?" His eyes met mine for less than a second. "It's complicated." "No," I said quietly. "It isn't." He looked down at the porch instead of answering. That told me everything. I've replayed that moment more times than I can count. Not because of what my son said, because he never once stepped aside. That should have been my first warning. Instead, I handed him the bicycle, then the macaroni. Then I smiled. A fake one. "Tell Ethan happy birthday." I walked back to my truck carrying nothing. Halfway down the driveway, I heard Ethan ask from inside the house, "Where'd Grandpa go?" Nobody answered him. 2 months later, my phone buzzed while I was replacing the furnace filter in my hallway. "Dad, if you don't call me today, we're going to lose the house." By then, the man who'd stood in that doorway wasn't asking me to stay outside anymore. He was asking me to save everything inside it. My name's Frank Miller. I'm 70 years old. For 39 years, I worked maintenance for the city of Columbus. Boilers, broken pipes, electrical panels. The funny thing about maintenance is people only notice you when something stops working. When everything runs the way it's supposed to, nobody thinks about the guy in the basement. I was fine with that. Truth is, I've spent most of my life trying not to be in anybody's way. That wasn't kindness. It was habit. And habits can cost you. Every weekday, I woke up at 6 without an alarm, even after retirement. Coffee, 1 spoonful of sugar, no cream. Then I'd carry a coffee mug onto the back porch and scatter birdseed beneath the old cedar feeder Carol painted with little yellow sunflowers almost 20 years earlier. The paint had faded. One side had cracked. I never fixed it. Some things deserve to grow old exactly as they are. Thursday mornings belonged to Carol. Fresh white carnations from Kroger. every single Thursday. People at the cemetery probably thought she really loved carnations. Truth was, she thought roses were overpriced. One night, years ago, I came home with a dozen red roses. She laughed so hard she nearly dropped the vase. "You paid how much?" "They're beautiful. They'll be dead by Tuesday." She walked back into the kitchen and came out holding a bunch of carnations she'd bought herself for $6. "These'll still be here next week." She was right. She usually was. Cancer took her 4 years ago. 43 years of marriage, reduced to one folded flag, a wedding ring in my dresser drawer, and conversations with a headstone every Thursday morning. Grief isn't dramatic most days. It's pouring 2 cups of coffee before you remember. It's hearing a floorboard upstairs and thinking for one stupid second that she's looking for her slippers. It's buying her favorite creamer out of habit, then putting it back on the grocery shelf because nobody's coming home to use it. I never got used to that part. Jason was our only child. Looking back, I made one mistake over and over again. I confused helping him with protecting him from consequences. When he backed my truck into the neighbor's mailbox at 16, I paid for the mailbox. When he forgot to mail his college tuition, I drove 2 hours to deliver the payment myself. When he maxed out his first credit card after graduation, I quietly mailed him a check without telling Carol. She found the canceled check anyway. That night she sat across from me at the kitchen table and slid the bank statement in my direction. "You did it again." He was in a bind. He was in a lesson. I didn't answer. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "Frank, one day he's going to believe your help isn't a gift. He'll believe it's his." I laughed. "Not Jason." She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "I hope you're right." I wanted to say she worried too much. I didn't, because deep down, I wasn't completely sure. She smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "I hope you're right." I wanted to tell her she worried too much. I didn't, because somewhere deep down, I knew she wasn't talking about Jason. She was talking about me. About a year before Carol got sick, Jason called on a Tuesday evening. "Dad, can you come over after work?" When I got there, blueprints and mortgage papers covered his kitchen island. Emily stood by the sink, twisting her wedding ring around and around. Jason looked excited. "We found it." "The house?" He grinned. "The one." I looked at the brochure. Big brick colonial in Dublin, 4 bedrooms. Finished basement, 3-car garage. The kind of house I would have slowed down to admire driving past. "That's beautiful," I said. "It is." Then I looked at the price. I looked again. "You two sure about this?" Jason laughed. "You're sounding like Mom." Carol smiled without looking up from the paperwork. "That's usually a good sign." Jason slid a folder across the counter. "We're short on the down payment." "How much?" $85,000. I let out a slow whistle. $85,000 isn't short, son." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I know. I'll pay every penny back." Carol didn't say anything. She just kept reading the paperwork. Finally, she asked, "What happens if one of you loses a job?" Jason answered immediately, "I won't." "What if interest rates go up?" "They won't." "What if life doesn't ask permission first?" Jason smiled. "It'll work out." Carol folded the papers and looked at me. Not at him, at me. That look said everything. "Don't do this unless you're prepared to lose it." I saw the look. I ignored it. That decision followed me for the next 4 years. 2 weeks later, I walked into Chase Bank, carrying a cashier's check. Jason met me in one of the conference rooms. He pushed the check back across the table. "I want paperwork." I laughed. "You don't trust your old man? I trust you. I don't trust memories." He opened his laptop, typed for a couple of minutes, printed 2 copies. It wasn't some generic note he'd pulled off the internet. It was detailed. Loan amount, payment terms, repayment upon sale, refinance or written demand. Then one sentence caught my eye. "The lender's claim shall be satisfied before any remaining proceeds are distributed to the borrower." I pointed at it. "That's pretty official." Jason smiled. "I write loans every day. I know where people make mistakes." Emily signed as a witness. Carol signed acknowledging she'd seen the agreement. Before we left, she quietly slipped our copy into the little gray fireproof box we kept in the hall closet. Then she tapped the lid. "Don't ever lose this." I laughed. "You're acting like it's gold." She answered without smiling, "No. I'm acting like one day someone will wish it had disappeared." At the time, I thought she was worrying over nothing. I didn't find out until much later. She'd been paying closer attention than either of us. After Carol passed away, Jason called every Sunday. Never missed one. Sometimes we'd talk football. Sometimes Ethan would tell me about school. Sometimes we'd just sit on the phone listening to each other breathe because neither of us knew what to say. Then the calls became shorter. 5 minutes. 3. Eventually, texts. Busy today. Talk later. Love you. The words were still there. The time wasn't. I kept telling myself that's what happens. Kids grow up. They build lives. Parents step back. That explanation got me through almost a year. Then little things stopped fitting. Ethan's baseball games. I wasn't invited anymore. Christmas dinner moved to Emily's parents' house. Nobody mentioned it until the day before. Jason missed 2 Thursdays in a row visiting Carol's grave with me. That had been our tradition. He simply forgot. Or maybe he remembered and chose something else. I've gone over those months 100 times, looking for the exact moment I lost my son. Truth is, you don't lose people all at once. You lose them an inch at a time. 3 days after Ethan's birthday, somebody left the casserole dish on my front porch. It had been washed, dried, wrapped inside 2 grocery bags. No note, no apology, just the dish. I picked it up and noticed something caught beneath the handle. A folded paper napkin, blue crayon, crooked handwriting. Sorry, Grandpa, love Ethan, I smiled. Then I noticed something else. The first word had been erased. Hard. So hard the paper was almost torn. I held it up to the light. Underneath sorry, I could barely make out another word. Miss. He hadn't written, sorry, Grandpa. He'd written, Miss Grandpa. Someone had erased it. I folded the napkin and slipped it into my wallet. That little piece of paper bothered me more than the doorway, because 8-year-olds don't edit themselves. Adults do. That should have been my second warning. About 2 weeks later, my neighbor Bill wandered over while I was raking leaves. You ever look at Zillow? Not much. My daughter sent me something. He held out his phone. It was Jason's house. Professional photos. Every room perfectly staged. The birthday balloons were gone. The dining room where I'd been turned away looked like nobody had ever eaten there. Across the top were 2 words. Pending sale. Pending. Not listed. Already under contract. I stared at the screen. Maybe they're upgrading, Bill said. I nodded. Maybe. Except something didn't make sense. Jason had never mentioned moving. Not once. I thanked Bill and went back to the yard. But I kept raking the same pile of leaves. That evening I called Jason. He answered almost immediately. Hey, Dad, you moving? A pause. Yeah. When were you going to tell me? We've just been busy. Busy. There was that word again. You already accepted an offer. Who told you? So it's true. Another silence. Then, we wanted to surprise everybody. I almost asked another question. Instead I said, well, I hope it works out. When we hung up, I noticed something strange. Jason had spent 6 minutes explaining the house. He hadn't asked me once how I was doing. That was new. And for the first time, I stopped making excuses for him. The next morning, while I was pouring birdseed into Carol's old feeder, my phone rang. It wasn't Jason. It was Emily. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Frank, can I come see you? I looked out at the empty backyard. The birds had stopped eating. Something inside me knew. Whatever Emily was about to tell me was going to explain the doorway, and it was going to change everything.